So this webinar today is the last one of our series of webinars around the topic of biocuration. We have had 4 webinars before covering topics like programming skills in biocuration, working with sensitive data, ontologies for biocuration, and text mining for biocuration. The recordings of all of these webinars, they are accessible through our EMBL-EBI training webpage. Next slide, please. Before we move on to the webinar, I would very quickly like to tell you a bit about the background and the motivation why we run this webinar series. So in 2019, Elixir launched an implementation study, and this implementation study was designed to identify communities of biocurators, to review the work that biocurators do, also to identify the resources and tools that biocurators use for their daily work, and to identify training gaps and needs that biocurators have. So some of these training gaps and needs have been covered or have been addressed by the webinars that we run so far. But the survey also showed that stronger links are needed between biocurator communities in academia and industry in order to create a more diverse biocuration community and also to better facilitate the knowledge exchange between industry and academia. And last but not least, to enable biocurators to better plan their career. And this is why I'm really happy to have a webinar today about biocuration in industry. Next slide, please. And we can also go to the next slide. So thank you very much. So this is why I'm really happy to introduce you today to our 2 speakers. I first would like to introduce you to Rachael Huntley. Rachael is a senior scientific curator at SciBite. And then I would also like to introduce you to George Georghiou, who is an information manager at Novartis. They will talk about their roles today they have in industry, about some of the projects, biocuration projects they have in industry, and also talk a bit about the skills which were helpful for them to transfer from their biocuration roles they had before to the role they have now in industry. And with this, I will hand over to Rachael. Thank you for being here, and yeah, over to you.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you to the organisers for inviting me to take part today. I'm going to be talking about curation in industry. So to be honest, I was a bit apprehensive at joining industry after spending so long in academia and non-profit positions, because I had the impression it was going to be high stress and constant deadlines. And I'm sure many of you probably think the same, but I hope with this talk then I can convince you otherwise. So I'm going to start with just going through my career path to date. So I did a PhD in plant biochemistry, and then after that I had several postdoc research positions in plant genetics. In the final year of my last postdoc position, I volunteered to do biocuration for the Arabidopsis information resource, and that turned out to be a good step. I really enjoyed it, and it set me up nicely for when I came back to the UK and applied for a position at the EBI in the Go annotation project. So I spent 9 years at the EBI, and I worked up to project lead for the Goa project. I then moved on to University College London in the functional gene annotation project, where I did Go annotation again, but for microRNAs and proteins involved in cardiovascular health. During my time at UCL, I was also a co-lead for the MSc module Bioinformatics Resources, and that gave me good experience in preparing and presenting training materials. After UCL, this was when I decided to join an industry position. I got fed up with having to write grants and wait for funding, so this was a good point at which to join a commercial company. And I've been here about 3 years, and I've been promoted about a year ago to Senior Scientific Curator. So for those of you who are not sure what SciBite is, we're a technology company that provides a suite of tools that are used to improve the usability of customers' unstructured documents. So many of our customers are pharmaceutical companies, and so you can imagine that they have built up huge amounts of documentation and databases over the years, most of which is largely unstructured, so it's really difficult for them to search for specific things. So what we do is make these vocabularies, which are lists of terms with unique IDs, together with all the synonyms that is used to describe them in text. So these vocabs can be optimized for use in named entity recognition or text mining. And so we have a text analysis engine called Termite, where the vocabs are run over the unstructured documents and they come out the other side tagged up with all the entities. So the entities that the vocabs cover can be anything from disease, drugs, chemicals, etc. Anything the customer is interested in searching for in their documentation. We also work with ontologies, so we can create custom ontologies according to what the customer needs, or we can also pull in public ontologies and augment them with extra synonyms, extra classes, etc. Those can also be pushed out to Termite to mark up the unstructured text. So the output, the marked up documents can be used in many different applications that the customer may have, or they can be put into our SciBite search engine, where you can do easy and complicated searching over the documents. So just to give you a couple of examples of use cases that we see at SciBite, one of our most common use cases is building knowledge graphs. So we'll take the unstructured documents, and they can be anything from published papers, PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, etc. And we can mark them up using our curated vocabs and ontologies using Termite. The output can easily be turned into RDF, which can then be loaded into a knowledge graph platform, and then also layered with other structured data sources. So you can then start to ask quite complicated questions of the data within the knowledge graph. The second use case is application of ontologies to electronic lab notebook and registration systems. So once you've got your ontologies together that you require for entering into your data systems, we can put those into Sentry, our ontology management platform, and then they can be served up via API to various applications that the customer may have. So this may be an electronic lab notebook. So the user will be typing in what they've done, and as they're typing, they will get suggestions of ontology terms. So this enables a fair data input at the very start. So instead of writing a synonym that nobody's ever used before, or just using their own way of describing something, they can use a standardized term at the point of input. Over here we have smart forms, so the ontologies can be served up in drop-down menus. And so when you start typing, you can pick from the drop-down menu the relevant term that you require. And then the clever part is that will then use the ontology and the metadata associated with that term to automatically fill in other parts of the form. So for example, cell type, disease, and tissue. So just to explain a bit about my current role. So I curate and maintain the vocabularies for named entity recognition in our Termite tool. I also create bespoke ontologies for whatever the customer requires using Sentry, the ontology management platform. And our customer projects are usually about 3 months long. So what we do is take the customer's documents and make vocabs that are customized to their documents and what they want to search within their documents. At the end of the 3-month project, the customer can then decide whether they want to license our products. Because a lot of our products are constantly being developed, they're kind of cutting edge, and we're always adding new features. My role also involves software testing to make sure everything's behaving correctly, all the synonyms are being tagged up correctly in a context-specific way, and just generally testing out the software to make it work properly. As with all other roles, there is a requirement for documentation and training material to train our customers on our tools, so that doesn't really change. And for about the last year and a half, I've been managing our contract curators and 1 full-time curator. So just thinking about the transferable skills that I've brought over from academia and non-profit organisations, it's really useful to be able to read scientific text, not necessarily to understand everything in it, but just to identify what the important entities, functions are, for example. Knowing how an ontology is built, how it's structured, how the classes can be related to each other, the types of metadata that can go into ontology is really very useful as well. Problem solving, I think we come across that in most roles actually. If a customer has a problem, they can't get a tool to work, or the synonyms not matching correctly, then we have to go away and figure that out. There's an element of help desk in all the roles that I've done as well, just being able to answer customers' queries. Writing is a good skill to have, both for the documentation side and training material, but also writing papers and use cases. And if you want to go down the management route as well, having some management skills could be very useful. So I just want to go through a few differences and between industry and academia that I've found in my experience. So in industry, we tend to work on short-term projects. So these 3-month projects, proof of concept, taking the customer's data and doing our analytics on it and serving them up. And if they're happy with them, then they license our products. In academia, it tends to be longer-term projects that are tied to the funding cycle. So they can be 3 to 5 year projects that you work on. In industry, we work directly with our end user, so our customers, in order to give them what they require. Whereas in academia, we rarely get to know the end user. We don't really know where our work is ending up. In industry, we deliver bespoke ontologies and vocabularies for the customer projects, whereas in academia, all I was doing was continuous curation of literature, which can get quite tedious after a while. In industry, we work with many different ontologies and vocabularies, whereas in academia, the positions I had, I was only really working on one ontology, the gene ontology, with a few others occasionally. So it's really quite varied, the work that we do in industry. Often we work with sensitive data, so you can imagine that pharmaceutical companies have private data that they want to keep private. So we often have to work within a VPN or an Amazon workspace, and this can be a bit challenging at times, getting that to work. However, in academia, I've only ever worked with public data, so there was no access problems. We get regular feedback from our customers. Obviously, they want it to work, and we want it to work for them. So we're on regular calls with them, discussing the projects. Whereas in academia, we hardly ever get feedback from end users, and mostly that's help desk tickets to complain about something. In industry, there's less need to publish papers, although we can do. But we do write blogs and use cases to help our customers out. Whereas in academia, you kind of need to publish regularly in order to get the funding. Just a few similarities as well. I have great job satisfaction with both industry and academic jobs, knowing that I'm advancing scientific research in healthcare. We get to work with other scientists, data scientists and programmers and learn a bit about what they do, which is all very interesting. We can also develop our own projects. So if we have an idea of how to make something work better or a new area to move into, we can go and develop that. We can also contribute to scientific community projects. So working in industry is not all about selling products and technology. We get to give back to the scientific community as well. And I'm just going to illustrate that by giving a couple of examples of recent community projects that we've been involved in. So the first is the COVID-19 challenge. So in March 2020, the COVID-19 Open Research Dataset, or CORD-19, was released by a consortium of institutes. This is a corpus of scientific literature around COVID-19 and coronaviruses, including over 100,000 full-text papers. With this came a call to action from the White House to develop new text and data mining techniques that can help the science community answer high-priority scientific questions related to COVID-19. So a group of us at SciBite got together and we curated the relevant vocabs for this data set. So that included disease, phenotype, SARS-CoV-2 proteins, and the human targets of those proteins. So we curated the vocabs and optimized them for named entity recognition within this data set called CORD-19 dataset. The output of this was over 45 million entities that we could tag. 68,000 of those were unique. So then we published this data set, the annotated data set, in a GitHub repository, and we also included the vocabs that we created and curated. We then wrote a paper describing the project. And since then, our data has been used or has been cited in various different publications. It's been included in various databases and even in a Python library. So that was quite a satisfying project to work on. The second project is the Pistola Alliance Seed project. So the Pistola Alliance is a consortium of organizations that include pharma, tech companies, and non-profits who work in collaboration to overcome common obstacles to innovation. And they work on projects that benefit the whole life sciences communities. So the SEED project is the semantic enrichment of electronic lab notebook data. So the motivation behind this was to create a set of open standards for structuring ELN data across life sciences, and that could be published in a well-established public ontology for everyone to use. So there were many phases to this project. Phase one motivation was there are big gaps in public ontologies and standards for pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic assay terms. They just don't exist. So my colleague Annalie Carson, she did the curation for this project. So she collated all of the industry relevant terms for pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic assays, and then integrated these into an assay ontology, which was based on the bioassay ontology. All the terms that she created, more than 190 new classes, they were submitted and are now available in the bioassay ontology, the public version for anyone to use. In addition, over 700 synonyms were also added to the BAO. So with that, I'm going to thank you. I put my email up here, so if any questions come through that we aren't able to answer today, I'll be happy to answer by email. But I encourage you to look at our careers website for upcoming careers, and pharmaceutical companies as well. They're starting to get data curation teams together. So I'd encourage you to look at the pharma companies. So just to conclude, don't be afraid of moving to a commercial company. It's not really that different to working in academia. And I think it even has a lot of advantages because it gives a lot of variety rather than plugging away at the same project for many years. You get to see many different things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And yeah, we will hand over to George.
Just a second while I share on my screen. I have to find my mouse first. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that all right.
Perfect, yeah.
Yeah, great. All right, well, everyone, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be back talking at the EBI. So my name is George Georghiou, and I'm an information manager or information scientist for Novartis. So probably wondering what exactly that means. I'll go into that a little bit and about how I ended up where I am today. So like Rachel, I had a very similar career path. I did my bachelor's in pharmacology at Stony Brook University, and then I went on to do a PhD in molecular and cellular pharmacology at the same university. Do I know anything about pharmacology? Technically, no, because my PhD actually was focusing on structural biology. So yeah, go figure. But after that, I went to go do a postdoc at the MRC unit for protein phosphorylation and ubiquitination in the University of Dundee in Scotland. So completely jumping ship and leaving New York, going across the Atlantic to the UK. And there I focused on working on CRISPR-Cas9 to study kinase pathway signaling. And after about 2 years there, I decided that it wasn't for me anymore. And I started looking for work, and the interesting position opened up at the EMBL-EBI for the gene ontology annotation project. So I decided to jump and apply for that, and I got accepted, and I worked there for about 3 years. Then due to personal circumstances, I had to, I left the UK to come to Ireland, where I currently work, and ended up struggling to find work for a little bit because as a curator, we all went through this process of trying to figure out what do we do afterwards. And I'm sure this is probably why a lot of you guys have been looking at these webinar series, which is a good thing. And I'm glad that these resources are here. So I saw a position on a LinkedIn advert that my brother-in-law had sent me originally for a postdoc, and this was on the links below, for an information scientist working at Novartis here in Dublin. And it was working in what's called the Novartis Knowledge Center, where I've been working from 2019 till now. And as of last year, I got promoted from information scientist to an information manager, which just a change in title, but not really in what I do. I don't actually manage people. About my team, because it's a little bit different than what Rachel does, we're kind of like the company library is the best way to think about it. That's how we started originally, but we've evolved over time as physical libraries have started to change their role. And in every company, there is a library system and librarians that are there to work, and also data scientists and information scientists associated with it. My team is now over, when I started, we were only about 50 people. We are now over, I think actually the number is now 85. And we're operating from 7 different locations across 3 different continents. So in the US, we have our sites in East Hanover, New Jersey, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. In Europe, we are in Basel, Dublin, London, Prague, and in India, we are in Hyderabad. We used to have somebody out in Shanghai, but they recently just retired. So being a global company, we have a lot of different end users we have to try to help. So I am dealing with a lot of different people all over the world, because Novartis has affiliations in many countries. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I've worked with some pretty interesting places so far. So what does my team really do? As I said, we were like a company library originally before, so we kind of start off at the bottom of the pyramid here, where we say we're part of licensing of information. So we look at content management systems and tools, vendor solutions, vendor data. So this could be things like licensing Elsevier literature data or drug data from particular other vendors that might be selling it. What we start going into from that licensing content is more into the content and dictionary management. So looking at how we can index, manage, and link data, and then finally taking that data and building it into custom information solutions, and then finally knowledge management solutions. And we operate there. And what we hope to do in the future is to work ourselves up to the machine learning, analytics, and AI portion. So that way, with the license that we knowledge, that we are able to take unstructured or structured data, make it semantic, allow people to gather their information, acquire knowledge, and then from knowledge with AI and machine learning, we can gather wisdom. At least this is what, how we tell it internally. But yeah, the reality is that we do strive to try to make the most important, help our associates make the most informed decisions that they can by providing them the right information, and then we convert that to knowledge, and then we accumulate that knowledge to allow them to make wiser choices in the future, especially based on past experiences. So my team specifically within the Novartis Knowledge Center is called Information Solutions. We kind of are broken up into two components: the data information side of things, where I sit, and then there's the customer and vendor relationship. So from the data information, we usually come with strong biomedical or chemistry backgrounds. At the moment, there's 3 of us. I'm the only biologist, and we have 2 chemists. We say, well, we do have a passion for information and problem solving. We come up with a lot of our associates come to us with a lot of issues, and we try to solve them. It's usually always around data and what is the right data source and what's the best way to kind of take it. But having this curation background, we kind of tie into the second point here, which is with this innovative mindset and analysts who love to play with, manipulate, and explore that data. So taking the data that we've annotated, or that you guys have annotated, and then figuring out ways to actually turn it, different ways to look at it and connect it to other types of data. And then obviously from the customer and vendor perspective, it's really about knowing how to interact with our customer base, which I say customers, is really other Novartis colleagues, because we don't have external customers. So you need to have good communication skills in presenting and listening, and then also be collaborative. It's really important to be able to work together and find ways to go through either with your fellow Novartis associate or with your vendor that's providing you the data or a solution that you've licensed. Now, to kind of show you this busy slide, this is my boss's slide, but I have to show it whenever I give a presentation. We work at different levels. At the top, we work at an enterprise level, meaning that we serve the entire company. So this means working with what we call our NKC portal, which is our repository of all the databases and data sets and custom solutions that we created. This needs to be curated by librarians for the content management side of things. And then we also provide expert consultancy, which is part of my role. We also build custom visuals and analytics and do custom curation as part of our kind of opt-in services, if you will. So these are not covered by the enterprise, but these are things that teams will come to us and ask us to build for them. So we do have to charge internally to do it. And then we also do provide some analytics by creating custom dictionaries, linking data, providing semantic search and indexing with the help of vendors and also our domain experts, such as myself. And then there's the data layer dealing with all the different types of data that we handle. So what do I actually do on a day-to-day basis? This long list is actually a good summation of it, because every day is a little bit different. All your customers and your associates have different use cases that you'll encounter. So I help in the curation of custom ontologies and controlled vocabularies for the NKC. So figure out different ways to kind of annotate our data and make it a bit more fair. I then generate annotated data sets. I also transform and harmonize different data sources for custom solutions and visuals. I offer consultant services. So really more on the data side of things, like if somebody wants to know what's the best source for gene sequence data, I'm able to tell them. Let's give an EBI the shout out for the ensemble. So that's always a really good one. I provide expert search services. So this is part of a service that we provide to help people find the right articles or data that they're looking for. We also, part of my role is evaluating vendor tools and data offerings. So I'll be called in whenever a new vendor has come to us and says, I built this really awesome knowledge graph application. Can you have a look at it and see if you guys are interested in buying it? So I'll be part of looking at that, or the data sets that they offer as part of their services, and figuring out whether they're much better than what we already license, or if they're can be supplemented, or if they are just outright not really that much better of a replacement. And then the subject matter expert, I serve as an expert for biological data, biomedical literature, and clinical trials. So really understanding all the data that's the type of data that's there, the metadata that surrounds it. And then the last one, which is actually kind of my fun sort of, create your own project kind of deal, is I run pilots or proof of concept projects to improve what we do in the NKC and to offering our associates. So this is kind of the freedom to play, which is actually quite nice to have in a role. So with that in mind, what do we do with ontologies from, let's say, public resources and things like that? Well, we handle a number of different types of data. I've already alluded to the handling biomedical literature and clinical trial data, but we also handle grants, patents, competitive intelligence data, internal documents and data, and things like that. So what we discovered as I started this role was that every vendor and every service has a different way of kind of tagging up their data with different ontologies or free text even. So like with biomedical literature, I've seen examples of databases that use MESH, the human phenotype ontology, disease ontology, OMIM, UMLS, their own custom one, which is typically based off a public one that they've modified. And then the same thing with clinical trials. And then when you get more into the other sources, it could be either custom ontologies a vendor has created themselves, or free text, or if it's internal, it could be a custom ontology that was built internally by people that didn't know what an ontology was, which is a little bit scary at times. So part of my job is to find ways to bring all these sources together using a common terminology or a common ontology to start annotating them and allow them to be a little bit more retrievable and reusable. So what we do with these data is eventually we will take them and convert them into custom visualization. So I give you an example here of one that we did not long ago with clinical trial data to look at where classes of drugs are across for a number of different companies in their development phase across certain disease areas. So you'll see here that we look at, we're tracking the number of drugs for anti-cancer that are registered, pre-registered, what development phase they're in. And then if they've launched, obviously they're registered. And then we also represented things like a bullseye chart for people to allow them to drill down and try to gain the insights and knowledge that they want to around a particular question. In addition to that, at least what I've been doing more recently is looking at creating semantically indexed data for AI and machine learning initiatives in Novartis. So a lot of companies are involved in AI machine learning efforts. And it's what we've discovered is that with even private companies, and Rachel can attest to this as well, and I do work with SciBite quite a bit as they are one of our providers for text mining services. We license their termite tool to kind of handle taking in this data and looking how we can apply ontologies to it and help make it a bit more fair and reusable, and to connect it to other different types of data like the biomedical literature, or the if there's a patent associated with that particular clinical trial for a device that they're trying. So in order to kind of make these things a little bit more applicable for AI and machine learning, I look at ways that we can apply these ontologies to them to help them actually create better quality training data sets that can then be applied to broader sets of either full text biomedical literature or patents or whatever there is out there that they're interested in looking at. But more importantly, what are some of the transferable skills from biocuration that I use? So Rachel alluded to a lot of these, and I think she did a really good job summarizing them. So I'm not going to try to spend too much time, but I'll kind of talk about how they apply to the work that I do. So understanding ontologies and taxonomies. So when it comes to looking at the data and how it can be annotated and how it can be connected to other ontologies, or using ontologies to connect it to other types of data, really having that understanding of how ontologies are structured, what are the cross-references that could be there underlying it, what's the hierarchy look like, can help you actually figure out what's the best way to tag up your documents, let's say if it's literature, and then retrieve those either at a really granular level or at a really broad category using something like equivalent to doing an ontology slim or a GoSlim, for those of you who are familiar with it. Reading and evaluating scientific texts an absolute must. You do it for as part of your curation role, and in industry, it's very much the same. Understanding automatic annotation and data curation. This is something that when I was working at Uniprot, the Tremble annotations that were coming, and Tremble, the portion of Uniprot that was not manual, which was called SwissProt, the manual portion. The Tremble portion, looking at how the automatic annotations are assigned based on homology and sequence similarity for genes and targets, you can actually take that and apply it to other types of data. So using tools like Rachael's termite and the SciBite's termites in order to annotate your documents based on certain vocabularies or ontologies to make them more useful, and understanding where it can go wrong and what you can do to fix it. That's actually still very applicable. Big one is working the help desk. If you've never worked a help desk before, take an afternoon and do it, because knowing the right kind of question to ask your end user in order to make sure that they get the data that they want, that they actually are looking for, is absolutely vital and will help you save a lot of time and a lot of frustration emailing each other back and forth. And also, it really helps you develop your communication skills. Time management skills, I admit I'm still working on this one, but it's really kind of important, because at least what I've discovered versus what I was doing as a data curator at the EBI versus industry is that my day is a lot more varied in industry. And I need, in order to stay on top and deliver projects on time, to really organize myself and make sure that I spend 2 hours working on this and 2 hours working on that, and then make sure that I don't get too involved in one thing and spend all the time and then miss a deadline. Deciphering institutional data. This one, I didn't really know how to categorize it, but really it is understanding data like what comes out of the EBI and the NCBI and what you can do with it and where it should, how to pull it in, how you can apply it to different data sets, and how you can actually transform it to connect it to either the literature or to a clinical trial data set, or for R&D purposes, to be able to kind of build a knowledge graph from it is actually quite important. And it's something that we do play around with quite a bit. Data governance, understanding who's in charge of the data, what is your source of truth, source of truth, is quite important as well. Then finally, one that I kind of didn't appreciate till I got to this job is understanding database architecture. So understanding how annotations are stored in a system, how things like a SQL database and the relationships between the different tables in the database itself are important, what connects them. This will actually help you. It actually stems from my understanding of how ontologies and taxonomies work. And it's really kind of helped me figure out what's the best way to extract certain bits of data from our vendors or from a public resource. And then finally, a working knowledge of metadata. And this is the one I probably spend the most time of my day doing, is really understanding the individual components of data, like an annotation, and really knowing that, okay, let's take a Go annotation, for example. It has to have the Uniprot identifier, like a gene. It has to have a Go term, so your annotation has to have a relationship between the Go term and the identifier. And then it also has to have a reference. And I'm probably forgetting something else because it's been about 3 years, but understanding the connections in that metadata and understanding that that type of metadata is applicable to all other types of data, that understanding of it, that working knowledge, really helps you kind of move on from just doing strictly data annotation to being able to work with different types of data or data sets in general. So I know for myself, having focused so much on gene ontology annotation for a long time in Uniprot annotation, when I started focusing on clinical trial data and biomedical literature metadata and things like that, that working knowledge and metadata that I got from working on EBI really helped with that. So finally, I just want to say thank you guys for listening to me. If you have any questions, you can email me at george.georghiou@novartis.com or via my LinkedIn. But I would also suggest to you, for those of you who are interested, check out Novartis's career page. We are looking for people who can do data curation, particularly in the Novartis Institute of Biomedical Research. If you're more interested in something akin to what I'm doing, we are primarily working out of Hyderabad and Dublin, but we are also looking across globally for associates who are interested in looking at information science, where you're sort of like this pseudo librarian, curator, data scientist, and consultant. So by all means, please do reach out. We'd love to hear from you.